how good at Japanese you need to be in order to get jobs.
The JLPT content, I would not be able to pass it right now if you asked me to, and I've been using Japanese for over 30 years. It may seem impossible to pass this test, right? If you had a job in a konbini in Japan, you're probably knowing more Nihongo just from being that customer service person and welcoming people with that keigo.
What is different between a Japanese interview and an English interview?
Desmas is fine. That should be appropriate as long as you're not talking to someone being like, hey, yo, what's up, Mr. Suzuki-san? Like, a lot more companies are trying out English in the workplace, so that's really interesting.
Wow. Hey everyone, and welcome to the We Are Not Daijoubu podcast. Today's a very special episode, and if you're interested in Japanese and how that can lead into a job, you're not going to want to miss this one. This episode is a bit different though, as I talked to Kasia, founder of the Japanese Jobs Job Board, as well as Ikigai Connections, as we talk through Zoom about Japanese jobs and how we're able to get one. Ever since coming back to America, I've been trying to find a job or projects that connect me with the Japanese language or the Japanese culture in some way or form. So this episode was also very eye-opening for me in order to find out things that I can do in order to work in more of a Japanese setting in the future. And I really want to share this information with you guys as well if you're interested. There is a lot of information that you don't want to miss, especially if you're going down this path of learning Japanese in order to get a job. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome, Kasia, from Ikigai Connections and Nihongo Jobs. Thanks so much for joining me today.
It is such a pleasure to be here, Martin. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. Also, I did listen to the other podcast too, and it was super interesting to learn a little bit more about your background in Japan too, which we can get into a little later. But
sure.
I was like, wow, that's so cool. Let's just go ahead and start out with a jiko shokai. We can do like a very quick Nihongo and then a little more explanation in Eigo about Nihongo jobs and kind of like what you do, because I think people would be super interested in that.
Sure. はじめまして、皆さん。カシャと申します。Ikigai Connections の代表です。どうぞよろしくお願いします。So if anybody knows Japanese, I just basically said hello. My name is Kasia and I am the founder of Ikigai Connections. My business baby actually turns 5 this August 2023. So it's been a lot of work, but also very enjoyable for me to kind of get online to do something that my younger Kasia really wanted. So my younger Kasia started off learning Japanese in high school. I went to Shiga Prefecture because Michigan and Shiga had this sister exchange program. And I was there for 4 months and hated it. It was so hard. It was brutally cold and I just didn't understand a thing. I didn't know what I was eating. But sometime during that trip, I met such great friends. My host family was amazing. My teachers were so welcoming. And as the trip progressed, by the end of it, I was like, I think my life just completely changed. It pivoted. So when I went back home to Michigan and I graduated from my senior year of high school, it was a different Kasia and I didn't know what to do at that point. So I went to Boston University, studied Japanese there, went to Kyoto for a year as my junior year abroad, which was fantastic. It was the Stanford program, KCJS, fantastic study abroad, and came back to Boston, was like, I got to go back. I mean, after living in Kyoto for a year, fantastic. So I did the next scholarship, went to Tokyo. I entered graduate school as well, and then decided I have to stay in Tokyo forever because Tokyo is fantastic. I got a job in the music industry, and then I only left Japan after 8 years because I wanted to try out interpreting translating, which led me to Poland in the electronics industry, doing Polish, English, and Japanese, then to Italy, which was fantastic to do Polish, English, and Japanese, but it was much more relaxed pace, a lot of enjoying life. And then I went back to Michigan and worked in the automotive industry. And now here I am doing this because I wanted to create a job board for people that if they want to find a Japanese job, regardless of the country, here's where to look. So I have a bunch of advice. Obviously, I focus on the United States because that's where I am. But I firmly believe that anybody who studies Japanese and wants to use it in a career absolutely can. So that is my Ikigai, my reason, my passion, the thing I like to do.
And that's really awesome that you have like found your Ikigai, because I feel like so many people are still searching for
Yes.
it. Like all of my friends are like in jobs where they're like, I don't know if this is like a forever kind of thing, right? Or even a long-term kind of thing, especially now where we're jumping from job to job every like 2, 3 years, if even that,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
want to talk a little more about how we became connected too.
Yes.
I think that was very exciting for me because I discovered you on LinkedIn, which you're popping off on LinkedIn. I'm very supportive of your LinkedIn. It's great.
Thank you.
I was looking for an outlet to find Japanese jobs, or maybe not even a Japanese job, but something to keep me connected to the Japanese culture as well. Because I did find after moving back to America, the transition to kind of keep what I had as well as like reassimilate back into America too. I think it's difficult to kind of balance both because there isn't a super strong Japanese culture, Japanese community in America. You have to take a few more steps to actually find it. So you having the outlet of people discovering Japanese jobs was like really cool, very unique too. Like I feel like it was a very great niche to have. Um, and then us kind of bonding over social media and kind of how to help you with social media, finding my own ikigai. We've been through it all.
I will say, like, you know this because I've mentioned it, but I'm going to share this for the world to know. You have such a good way of reaching out to people. So, if somebody is interested in connecting, networking, it's about building relationships. So, you and I met online through LinkedIn. We've had Zoom calls. You're on the other side of the United States, and yet we were still able to connect over that and get to know each other. And it's for me, seeing how much value you provide in the videos you create and your outreach, I just think is fantastic that a lot of people who are watching this video can learn a lot from you. I think if there's something that you want to test to see if it is a part of, whether it's your ikigai or just something that you enjoy doing. So, ikigai, let me just talk about that real briefly. There's
Oh yes.
ikigai is for people who don't understand what that means, it's like it can be defined in the West as like your passion in life. But in Japan, it's a little bit different. It doesn't have to be as, the four circles that are descriptive of what you love to do, which
Mhm.
what you can be paid for. That's kind of a Western description of what ikigai is. But still, regardless, that's kind of what I use because it's easy for us to understand. And I often talk about how, not everybody wants to have their ikigai related to their career. So if you just want to go to work and do your thing, and then after work, you have your own private life, that is completely fine. But there are some people out there that maybe like me, I'm a workaholic, right? So I'm going to be at work many, many hours of the day. And I really enjoy working. I like to do it. So for me, I would really appreciate if my career ikigai was in line with like my passions. So for me, that's Japanese, using Japanese language and culture. Not everybody has to do that, but especially like, when you're starting out and you like, wait, if you come back from a trip or living in a foreign country like you did, you kind of, that changes you as a human. It changes your dreams. You're like, wow, that was interesting. And that changed this part about me. And now I want to do this. So as long as we're flexible and wanting to try different things, I think it'll help us because there's no correct answer. My ikigai now is different than it was 10 years ago and will be different again in 5 years. So I just think as long as we're like you're providing value all the time, creating great relationships. And I think that is really fantastic. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you so much. And I think too, like to highlight that your ikigai does change. It's not a constant in life because I people feel more comfortable, I think, if there's the idea like I can do this for the rest of my life, no worries, like because people are so hesitant of change too.
Right.
But
Right.
being able to identify an ikigai and then also being able to change that later in life, saying like maybe I lean more towards this way than that way. I think is like super important to acknowledge as well.
Absolutely. Flexibility is key. If I go to medical school for X number of years and I do a rotation and this, and I think, oh my gosh, because I spent all this time on it, it means I have to be a doctor forever.
Right.
No, you can change your mind if something happens, and it's not wasted time. It's something you did to build your skills, to become a different person, and it's totally fine to kind of switch and do something different. Maybe it could be slightly related, but we have to give ourselves a little bit more freedom to do that, I think. And I know it's not so easy sometimes, and economic factors will definitely affect that. But if we
Sure.
can at least be okay with ourselves for changing our mind about something and wanting to do something different, that's fine too.
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to get into I have three main questions that I think a lot of people have about Japanese jobs, about kind of Japanese in general, um, and things that I think you will be able to hopefully answer to whoever's watching this.
Awesome.
And
Let's do it.
the first main one I have is basically, how do you get a Japanese job? That's kind of the first theme that we're gonna go over here. So first, let's talk about how long you've been working as a specialist for Japanese job. You said earlier that it's gonna be your fifth year with
Yes.
Japanese jobs.
Yeah, I think, I've been doing Ikigai connections for almost 5 years, but even before then, in every role that I did in the 4 countries that I lived in, I was always stubborn and wanted to find something related to Japanese. And so I kept telling my friends who are also in the same boat, whether it was a different country or different industry, I'm like, this is going to happen. We're going to find something. You just have to keep, it wasn't easy. And I am very stubborn. So maybe that was helpful, but I just always talk to students about it. Especially here in Michigan, I visited a lot of universities and just like talked to students and said, hey, first of all, do you know that using your Japanese language and or cultural skills can be helpful in a career? So I feel like this is a global economy, and Japan is one of the strongest too. Lots of stuff going on there with all their industries. They represent so many industries and job roles in so many countries. So wherever we live, I feel that we can find a Japanese job. So again, I focus on the United States. If you wanted to go to Japan, look for a job, that's very possible too. There's a bunch of recruiters and job boards that help the people who want to go to Japan and work there if they're non-native Japanese people. The only thing is you have to find somebody who helps you with a visa, and that's not impossible. It's a little difficult, but you can do it. Here in the United States, I focus on the companies, mainly the subsidiaries of companies that have headquarters in Japan, who come to the United States and want to do business here. Honestly, I think all industries are covered. And a lot of times these companies are, they know they have to work in whatever state they're going to be in, whatever city, and they're going to hire a bunch of local people to help with all sorts of, from accounting to marketing to engineering to medical to whatever they're doing. They need to fill that with local hires. But they don't always think that those local hires can have Japanese language or cultural skills. So I'm constantly telling people, I'm telling two sides. I'm telling the employers, hey, did you know that just by having that Japan connection, if you look for a candidate that has like the Japan study abroad or JET program or just study Japanese on their own, those people will be really interested in working with you. So why don't you consider hiring them for these roles that don't necessarily require Japanese? But who knows what could happen in the future with those roles and requiring more Nihongo or whatnot. And then I keep telling the job seekers, look around in your area. There's got to be some kind of company. You can look first, if you want to do a Google search, find the consulates, the Japanese consulates in your areas. That tends to be where the Japanese companies congregate. So here in Michigan, we have a consulate that represents Ohio and Detroit, Ohio and Michigan. We got a Chicago one nearby. California has two, at least from my understanding. And then after you look for the consulates, look for the Japan America societies or Japan societies. That's where a lot of the Japanese companies are located. But there's still many companies outside of those areas Plus, there's companies that have no Japanese headquarters, but their customers are Japanese. So they have to figure out and scramble and find people to help them. And they literally have no idea where to start. They're like, wow, we just have this client. They speak Japanese. They have a headquarters in Japan. Maybe we should do something to work with with this company. What can we do? And they think of finding somebody who speaks Japanese, is bilingual. We can talk about that another time. But there's so many ways that you can find the Japanese related jobs, except you got to kind of look for them. So my job board could be a first starting place, but if you are set on a particular region, if you want to work in Wisconsin, you can absolutely do your own research, or whatever state. Just kind of look for companies that are related. And then maybe you have to go to them and promote yourself and say, hey, I think I'd be great at this company because of X, Y, and Z. And oh, by the way, I know Japanese, or I went to Japan and I know you're headquartered in Japan. Let me help you out. Things like that. So kind of a long rambling answer to say that anything is possible. And even if you don't find the opportunities or don't hear about them from somebody, it doesn't mean you can't make them yourself.
And I think that's also something that I've learned within the past few years, kind of marketing yourself and your skills that may not be as common, and then being able to turn that into a job, especially if there's nothing that really like fits what you want to do and what you're capable of doing as well.
Right. Yep. We have to keep marketing ourselves. Resume can get seen by a recruiter. I don't know, what is it, 6-7 seconds per resume? It's sometimes bonkers what you hear. So there's other ways to do that. And I often say that like networking and creating relationships, whether they're online, like what you and I did, or in person at, events that a Japan American Society organizes, those relationships can sometimes be a great way to kind of know what's happening in the area. And maybe if there is an opportunity, you can jump on it, and people already know about you too. So,
So yeah, you've answered a lot of my questions already, which is great.
Yes.
Let's see, what shall I go over? So, is Japanese a good skill to have in 2023? I would say yes, right?
Yes, absolutely. Especially in America, I believe knowing another language really makes you very beneficial to a company that wants to deal globally, because no matter how much AI you have, no matter how good your Google Translate or DeepL or whatever this AI stuff is for translation, it's still kind of not the same as that human connection, the human way to go through miscommunications, because they're going to happen no matter what time, what year. To this day, there's always still miscommunications happening. It's only because we just don't understand what we don't know. So I still believe that Japanese is a very important skill to know. It's a very difficult language to learn for people who are not native Japanese. And I think that it's just shows how, if you can understand the 3 alphabets or the 2 main alphabets and kanji characters, that just goes to show that you really put a lot of time and effort into understanding this culture.
I think people would also be interested in where most Japanese jobs are kind of located in America, because we've already kind of established that, Japanese jobs aren't necessarily in Japan, right? They can be all over the world.
Right.
Which is the first misconception, I think. But also, depending on where you are in America and kind of what's available to you, what's remote and not remote, hybrid, as we were talking a little earlier off camera, are there areas where more Japanese jobs are situated compared to just kind of being more broad and all over America?
That's a really tough question to answer, but the things that I will say that I've been learning in my journey is that, you've got like banking and recruiting in like New York in the Northeast, right? You have manufacturing. Michigan is huge with the automotive industry. And when manufacturing in those areas, like throughout the Midwest and to the South, when one like big company like an OEM comes, all of those Japanese suppliers also come. So when you hear about the big names like the Toyotas, the Hondas, then you know that it's not just that big company, it's all the tiny companies. They're not tiny, but the smaller companies that support them also come to the United States in that area. I believe in the South, like Texas is very energy focused. And in California, it's a lot of like Silicon Valley is huge with startups and biotechnology. And like there's just a lot of high tech related in California. There's a lot of cultural stuff too, like in DC with the main like Japan related societies. So there's really a lot that's out there. I know that like what is it, Nintendo is and the West Coast, and there's a lot of like manga and anime and video is potentially out there too. But you will find other companies throughout the United States as well, that maybe don't necessarily fit into that generic industry or type. So I think one of the best ways to do that is definitely go to your local consulate's Japanese consulate website and see. They usually have a tab, because almost all of the consulate websites look the same. They have a tab for like industry or commerce or something like that. And then you can get more understanding of how many companies and what they're doing in that area. So that could be a great way to do some research too.
I've never even thought about that, kind of
Yeah.
seeing like, what kind of jobs are in your area and how that
Yeah.
revolves around Japanese jobs too. But that is something I really need to look into.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And
Wow.
also it depends that if there's like a business society, like a in
Mhm.
Japanese, it's called Nihon Shokokai. Those tend to be basically for the Japanese expats. Sometimes it can be bilingual, so it introduce the local people as well. But they will definitely have like a list, a membership of all the companies that are there, or even going to the Japan American Society pages, you'll see who's a sponsor. So you'll know which companies are part of that area, and those sponsors could be from Japan, Japanese companies, or local companies that just want to be involved with Japanese businesses.
And I think one more question that people, including myself, would be really interested in is how often for Japanese jobs in America will you be using Japanese in a job compared to like, I mean, when you're in Japan and you're working for like a
Right.
a kaisha, you're probably using it 100% of the time. But is it more or less the same for a Japanese job in America? Is it dependent on whether it's a Western company or a Japanese company?
Yes. So starting with Japan, I'm excited to hear that. And I haven't been to Japan in a long time. So it's hard for me to talk about Japan, but I'm hearing a lot more companies are trying out English in the workplace. So that's really interesting.
Wow.
So like I think it was Rakuten is one of the
Mm.
e-commerce companies that said that all employees are going to speak in English, but that could be difficult for a lot of the local Japanese. So it's a tricky topic of discussion, a whole other topic in its own. But I think in Japan, there's more and more bilingual abilities. So if you do, they've always said that you have to be like super good at Japanese to get a job in Japan, which is true. I think the better your language skills are, the easier it will be to get a job. But lately, I've been hearing more and more that, especially the tech companies, they're not requiring as much fluency. So that's an interesting point. In the United States, my impression from what I've been seeing in the last few years, and as I talk to various companies, it really does depend on the industry and it depends on the role. So, for example, there could be, or just even the company itself, too, there could be some companies that invest in the United States. They're here to grow their business, enter the US market, and they may expect their Japanese language roles to be fulfilled by their Japanese expats from Japan. So sending an employee for 3 to 5 years to the United States, and those people will learn English. And a lot of times the entire company is run fully in English. So I feel that it's almost unheard of to these companies that they have a local person working there that knows Japanese language. So that's why I tell my followers, that's how you stand out. When you talk in Japanese or when you talk about your experience in Japan, even if you can't really speak the language, that makes you it shows that you have interest in the company culture, in the company history. And it's just really, I think, something that makes you stand out as a candidate. So let's say company X, headquartered in Tokyo, opens up a location in Houston, and they're not expecting any local employees for any of their roles, and they post for an accounting position. And let's say you happen to like really want to work at this company. The job description doesn't say anything about Japanese, but you apply and you're like, listen, I spent time in Japan. I'd love to be, and I'm great. My accounting skills are on par. I can do this role. Plus, I have the Japan component. Test me out. And then you go and you enter. And I promise you, I like swear this is going to happen. Nobody realizes this in the beginning, but if you actually tell people that you speak or know the culture, you might start seeing opportunities that be like, oh, hey, there's an expat sitting in this next apartment. I hear that they're having trouble talking to somebody. Let me go help them. And oh, look, there's this PowerPoint that came from Japan. I understand what that says. Here, let me translate this for you, because you start finding ways to be useful and the company will notice that. And you can even, like, companies have created positions for people who started off in a typical standard job. They create a role for them because they realize how important that bicultural, bilingual component, how important it is to their business. But then there are some roles, and I'll go to the opposite end of being, you should be fairly fluent. I think that if it really depends on who you're interacting with, but a typical Japanese company who will expect like a salesperson or account manager to communicate with native Japanese customers and suppliers or clients, they're going to want you to speak very good Japanese. So for those roles, it might be difficult to bust out with like not really knowing your keigo and stuff. However, I have met some companies that are like, it's okay if you don't speak perfect Japanese. You're in this role and you stand out because they've never met a Japanese speaking American salesperson. So it's like it gives them a unique twist on that role anyway. So it makes them stand out more. So I've seen all kinds of things. It's kind of what you make it. It's not just the language and your job related skills. It's also your personality. And if you want to work as a bridge between cultures, you can do that with so many opportunities.
And I think this is a great segue to get a little more into how good at Japanese you need to be in order to get jobs. Firstly, I think it's important that we should explain Japanese fluency and kind of how that is separated between getting a job in Japan, getting a job in America. If people aren't really familiar, and feel free to correct me, but for getting jobs in Japan, they mostly take into account your JLPT score.
Yes.
What does that stand for?
Japanese language proficiency test.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
And there's a scale N5 to N1, which kind of determines your Japanese proficiency. From what I know about it, because I actually have never taken it, I was trying to take it during the pandemic, but not the opportune time.
Yeah.
Also, if you are trying to take the test in America, it was offered 2 times a year, but I remember for pandemic times, it was only offered once a year. And I'm not sure if they really changed that sense,
I
but
think it's still one time a year.
okay. And if you are not near a testing center, which I've had a few friends that have had to fly across the country in order
Yep.
to take the test, like it just seems somewhat inaccessible in America if you are not in the prime location, and that could be a little bit of a barrier, especially if you want to work in Japan. Because I think in
Yeah.
Japan you're able to find the test 3 times a year.
I think it's twice, if I'm not
Is it
mistaken.
twice a year there too?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they have more centers there and it's easier to
Right.
get there. Whereas here, mm-mm. Yeah.
Exactly. So speaking, between N5 and N1, usually N2 to N1 is where you want to be when you're trying to apply to a job directly in Japan, I've heard. Uh, N3 to N5, maybe you can get like a job at a konbini or um, more English Japanese related jobs of the mix compared to jobs where you need to be a little more fluent. People are looking for N2, N1.
You did a very good summary. That's my
Okay.
understanding as well too. And I think from what I hear about Japan, and it was maybe a little bit stricter before when I was applying for a job. I felt that stress that I had to take the
Okay.
Nihongo Noryoku Shiken, the
Mm,
JLPT. It was to me, I feel as if it's understandable that this standardized test is so important to these Japanese companies. I get that. And I also get that companies that are not in Japan, and I'm talking about the US because that's where I'm focused on, they hear that they have to have a JLPT and the person needs to be N1 because why wouldn't you want the best speaking person? And I hear that from people who don't understand what it's like to learn the language, and it drives me nuts. I get it. Again, you should have a standardized test because otherwise, really, it's just going to be all over the place, and you really won't know what kind of candidates you're getting if you're looking at it from an employer perspective. And if you're a job seeker, and if you're really serious about using Japanese, then yeah, having something to study for, having that goal, that December date in mind where you're going to study, and maybe there's study groups, that's a great thing to do and work towards. But it's just not fair because the JLPT content, although very good, and I would not be able to pass it right now if you asked me to, and I've been using Japanese for over 30 years, I couldn't pass it now because it's wording, it's vocabulary that I just don't use on a daily basis. So if you wanted to use it in a work, if you take the test to show that you can work at a company, that's fine if the company understands that the terminology is different. So that's why it's like, it's such a weird scenario. And I keep talking about it with employers saying, if you see a JLPT score, fantastic. The person studied well. They passed the test. They probably traveled and spent a lot of personal money to do it. Kudos to this person. But if they don't have that N1 that you want, please give them an opportunity anyways, because just because they have a test score doesn't mean that they can speak it, because there's no testing of that either. There's a lot of people I know who are professional interpreters who don't need a JLPT test to prove that, and they can't prove it that way. And there's professional translators who do fantastic work for companies, like seriously hard stuff, that may or may not pass the JLPT because it's just different content. So we just have to keep that in mind. And again, I know I'm getting very nitty-gritty on this, but it's important for people who study Japanese and want to use it because it may seem impossible to pass this test, right? Whereas if you had a job in a konbini in Japan, you're probably knowing more Nihongo just from being that customer service person and welcoming people with that keigo. I think that experience in itself, which maybe on the resume says convenience store clerk, that means nothing for an American person. But if they know what Japanese konbini are like, they'll be like, you worked at a convenience store? Tell me more about it. So we just have to educate the people that we're trying to promote ourselves to, I think.
Going off of what you said too, I had a lot of Chinese friends from either mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, while I was living in Japan. And they were in more accelerated programs that focused a little more on just passing the JLPT.
Wow.
Being able to get to that N2, N1 level so that they could secure jobs, secure visas, those kind of things. But what I heard that they ran into a lot is because they were able to adapt a little faster because the Chinese characters were more familiar. And that's not to say the meanings are the same. They are different. And so there still is that learning. You need to learn it, right?
Yep.
But I think when you are younger and you learn that kind of style of writing, your brain adapts to that a little quicker than when you're learning the alphabet here, right?
Right.
But they were able to pass, JLPT N2, N1 pretty easily, but then they would get stuck on actually finding a job because they didn't have the communication skills in order to pass any of the interviews, which I thought was just so interesting because first of all, it's almost like a never-ending battle, right? But then also how the JLPT doesn't necessarily prepare you for actual work or just life living in Japan either. It reminds me of like an SAT almost, where it's just a barrier to get to a next step instead of really testing your abilities on what you can do and identifying the needs of Japanese in a company. Like yes, speaking is important. So it would be nice to implement that into a test for people who are stronger speakers than readers and writers and so forth.
Right. And granted, if you pass, an N2 or N1, then you understand the components of a sentence, and you can understand the wa, the ga, the particles in between that, how to end a sentence, and all of that you can adapt to the lingo, the terminology that you would use at your future employers. as long as that future employer understands that you need a little bit of time to learn the terminology and apply what you know from these tests. So sometimes I run into employers who are like, oh, they're N1, so they're just going to come in and start talking like blah, 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 like it's no big deal. Well, it's great that the employer has that much like confidence in somebody entering this industry where none of that stuff is taught in school. You won't know it until you enter, whether it's English or Japanese. So if the company thinks that way, well, that's great. But we need to educate them and say, hey, listen, I've got the fundamentals. I've been reading your site. I know what you're talking about in English. I'd like to, have some time on the job to kind of learn what this means, not just from the words, but like what the technology looks like or what the product looks like, what the service is like. And just as long as they can ask for that time to kind of merge the new with the foundational work, I think is important. But also you're mentioning, I think, yes, I wish the JLPT offered that kind of support to help you prepare for the workplace, but there is that BJT test. Have you heard of the BJT?
Oh, I haven't. Okay.
So the business Japanese test, I took it when it was run by Jetro, and now I believe it's in the United States. You can go to, I think, 3 or 4 testing centers that are located in the United States, and you can go there anytime. It's an online test. You just show up. So it's not like once a year, December 3rd. It's you go there anytime. So there's still travel involved. But just studying for the BJT, the business Japanese test, is so helpful because the questions are like literally what you would experience in the office. Hey, picking up the phone, you hear this. Hey, you're in a meeting. This is the script. What's happening in this meeting? Hey, this is an email that came in. What does this paragraph mean? Like, it's so realistic that right now with no studying, I feel much more confident in taking the BJT than I would the JLPT. There's no way I'm going to pass the JLPT anymore. So I feel as if that one test is just not very well known. So I think that would be, if people were look it up, BJT. I also have it on my website, but BJT I think would be much more, it's less studying too. You just like, it's not like complex as the other JLPT levels. So it's just kind of memorizing phrases like what you say, "O sewa ni natte orimasu." You're going to say that 1,000,000 times in a year. So might as well practice it. You're going to say "yoroshiku onegaishimasu" 5,000,000 times. Might as well practice it, as opposed to the nuances of some historical characters. So I'll get off my soapbox at this point. You can tell I'm very passionate about this topic.
No, I feel like that's a great point too, because yeah, I have not heard of that test either.
Yes.
And having even just a resource, not even a test, where you're able to learn the phrases that you need, because we're gonna go into Keigo and stuff in a minute, but just being able to pull what you need, because I feel like Keigo is so almost scripted in a way sometimes,
Yeah.
where even my Japanese friends say, "Oh, I have trouble because I only use it in the workplace," and like it's almost like a second brain kind of,
Yeah.
where you turn that on in the workplace and then you turn it off and talk normal, casual.
Yeah.
I think that is a good like memorization technique almost, in order to feel more confident and more comfortable in a workplace setting.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Some of the stuff you just have to memorize, and then it takes a while to memorize it, but then once you memorize it, it just comes out when you talk. So I remember I had to memorize when I was in grad school, I had to say a speech and I had to use Keigo. So speech is happyo, and I would say, それでは発表させていただきたいと思います. And I know some of your listeners who don't know Japanese will be like, what is this gibberish? But the very ending, させていただきたいと思います, is something that I've used so many times since. And it was just something I learned and said over and over and over. And now I just add a verb or a noun or whatever the doshi is, and then add the remaining sentence, which, as you said, is memorization. So, of course, if you don't know 100% of Keigo, it's going to be maybe strange to say that thing and then jump back to desmas form, the more just polite form. Going back and forth, though, it doesn't matter. You're learning. And if somebody is willing to hear you learn and pick up new things all the time, then you can not confuse, but you can kind of mix the two together, and just as long as you're communicating and trying, I think that's what counts.
And one more thing before we get to our next section, coming from more personal experience, I would
Yes.
say not that I'm amazing at Japanese anyways, but I'm more confident in my speaking than I am my reading and writing. And then, from the example earlier, there are people who are more confident in reading, in writing. It really is dependent on your experience with learning Japanese, I think.
Right.
But when you're able to have more proficiency in one compared to the other, is there a way to make that more marketable when you're looking for a Japanese job? Or is it like, oh, you just need to be well-rounded in everything, right?
This is such a good question. I think looking at it's kind of blends the conversations that we talked about with your ikigai, your career ikigai, and looking for a job, what kind you're looking for, reading job descriptions. It's a journey figuring out what you like to do. So I know professional translators who are, that's the written word, right? That they're so good at reading and writing, and they can write kanji like it's nobody's business. But you get them on stage or talking to people, like they completely clam up because they don't feel comfortable speaking it. But they're still making a great living doing some bonkers type translations that a normal person just couldn't do because that's where their brain just excels. Same with interpreters. You could be somebody who is talking all day, listening all day, you're just talking in Japanese and your brain is fully Japanese. And yet you can't really sit down and maybe write a kanji, which that's totally fine too. You have to let go of that part because in your daily life, you're focusing on the speaking and the listening version. Maybe you can take notes, and you can take notes in hiragana, the basic alphabet for all I care, or write it in English. Who cares? It's what you kind of want to do, what you excel at, and where your skills are needed. The problem that I run into is that I see these job descriptions that say you need to be fluent in speaking, listening, reading, and writing, which sometimes that's a little too much to expect. So what I encourage job seekers to do is read through the job description and kind of see, is there more an emphasis on the speaking? Is there more an emphasis on listening, reading, or writing? Because it could just be one of those four or all four. So it really depends, what kind of, like if you're going to be helping a company with expats who are coming from Japan to the United States and you're going to be supporting them in their move, you may just need to know how to listen in Japanese and speak enough Japanese that they can understand you and they're happy that you're speaking to them in Japanese. But if you're going with them to Social Security office or showing them the grocery store, teaching them how to drive, all of that you're doing in English and you're teaching them like what the local way of doing things is. So kind of think a little bit about that. If you are doing, let's say you're a designer, a project designer for an engineering company, maybe you get all your drawings in Japanese and all you have to really focus on is seeing the written and putting it into written English. So maybe you're not even talking to anybody. So it really requires some digging. And if you can ask those questions to the recruiters or the hiring managers that are posting these job ads, they'll be like, wow, this person, first of all, read the job description. Who does that these days? And then they'll be like, wow, this person seems interested in the role. And then if you do extra credit and read their website and say, hey, I see that this and this and this happens and let me help you in this way, I think you can have a good conversation. And maybe I'm not saying like a mediation or like a negotiation, but just like a better understanding of what you would actually do. And if you can say that, hey, I excel in my speaking, like you said, I feel comfortable speaking. This job requires a little bit more writing, but I still love to learn Japanese. So if you are okay with me sitting there with a dictionary and kind of going through and figuring it out, my learning curve is going to go like from, super fast because I want to do this. And they'll be like, well, we've got nobody else who's willing to do this. Let's consider this candidate and give them an opportunity. So we need to kind of find ways to meet together because otherwise hiring managers aren't going to find the people that they want. And we're not going to find the jobs that we want because it just doesn't seem like it's within reach we're even able to get it. So yeah, promote yourself.
Yes, promoting yourself is very important.
Hard.
And I think one of the best ways to promote yourself is through the interview process because you kind of get the face-to-face, which leads into the interview section of Japanese jobs. I feel like when they say, oh, you're going to be using Japanese in this interview or something like that, I'm always like, 緊張してます or fuan. Because it's not only am I not super great at Kegel, but also I guess I would say switching my brain from Nihongo to Eigo just because I really haven't been using Japanese as much lately. I think it
Mhm.
is anyone who's lived in Japan and then has come back with any kind of knowledge of Japanese. I think they find it a little hard because you do need to get out of your circle in order to actually practice to keep that up, right?
Oh, yeah.
But what is different between a Japanese interview and an English interview? And I think we can stick a little more with what to expect for Japanese jobs in America instead of going straight into, Japanese interviews in Japan, which probably
Yes,
is a whole different story as well. But
it is. Yes. I think in
let's
Japan, it's much more complicated with their
mhm,
Shushoku Katsudo job search. It's intense.
mhm.
But in the United States, I feel that, and again, I do speak with a lot of employers and hiring managers. Generally speaking, I would say that it's the local HR person who is not Japanese who's handling the initial interviews. So I'm going to give you an example of Susie Smith is an HR manager, has to, or a recruiting specialist, has to find somebody who knows Japanese for Department A. And maybe Susie doesn't understand what the department does really when it comes to that role and how it's related to Japanese, but they'll get a job description, they'll post it online, they'll go through resumes and they'll put together, they'll get some resumes that they think are applicable and can fit this role. But Susie may also be looking at the basic skills that are needed for that role outside of the Japanese component. So I would say that probably the majority of the time, if you have an interview, the first one's going to be in English with Susie, who's going to be going through and understanding you a little bit better, trying to figure out if you're a good candidate for the company in general, the whole company culture, kind of like an introduction, right? If there is a Japanese language component, it can either come as a second interview or it can come in as a small portion of that interview. And I'm going to guess companies will do it differently. They might bring in an expat to be like, hey, can you just find out John's, Japanese understanding? And maybe it's just a small portion. It could be like a written thing, like, hey, can you just show us what you can write? And Susie will have no idea what the Japanese is like, anyways. So it might be something that she may show another expat or somebody who does understand Japanese. So I feel as if it's okay for us to ease into it. It's kind of like maybe there aren't as high expectations of somebody expecting us to bust out in fluent Japanese. They'd like us to because that's the job role they have to fill. But they might be like, well, if you're studying Japanese, well, let's take a look and see what you've got. So just, I would say, confidence in how you're presenting yourself, your personality, let that shine through. And if you're nervous, because everybody gets nervous, just try to, I think practice will help you with that nervousness. So maybe if you have a friend, if you have a teacher, if you have if you're still in school or if you're an alumni of a university, see if you can go and speak with like a counselor and do practice runs with somebody. And just, I think practice will definitely help with that. And also, practicing actual interviews will help. So let's say you have an interview with a company, you're like, there's no way that this is going to move forward, but hey, I've got an interview and maybe they're not like top of my list, but it's very good to meet other companies and see what it's like. That could also be considered, it's never a wasted interview. That's a way for you to like put yourself in a spot, arrive early because you never know how long it's going to take, be dressed professionally or whatever is appropriate for that industry. And just, I think preparing yourself, you can just do the best you can. You cannot expect yourself to be like this amazing interviewer because nobody is like that. Everybody gets nervous, regardless of how many years they've been working or however long they've been in a certain field. It just makes us nervous in general. So, breath of fresh air, get in there, show them your best, be kind, be respectful, and I think you'll do great.
And I do want to also shout out that you have a service, if right,
Yes,
that
yes, I do.
you help people with practicing for their Japanese interviews, right?
Yes, yes. I specifically focus on interview practice prep. So if somebody is doing it online or if they need to prepare for an in-person one, we'll go through both of those and I'll try to make you feel as nervous as possible. And I'll ask you all these crazy questions and I'll talk super fast in Japanese if there is a Japanese component, but then at least you get that practice done and then you can go and maybe feel a little bit easier if you go to the actual interview and be like, okay, Kasia was rude to me and Kasia was awful and Kasia was this, but at least I got this, right? Because of course I'll do that on purpose just to make you feel that nervousness. But I think it's just practice.
I think it's also important to explain because we've been talking about keigo and a little
Yes.
bit kenjogo, what that is for people who don't know.
Right.
um,
Keigo, go ahead, dozo.
no, you please. I feel like you are the expert in this more
No.
than me.
Well, this part is actually really difficult for me because there's so many layers of talking politely to somebody. It depends upon the relationship that you are with with your aite, with the person you're speaking with. So you're going to think about this person. Are they above me in the food chain, whether they're the CEO of a company, or are they the customer? Do I have to speak to them in such a way because customer is God? Or am I like, or are they my junior? Are they new? Am I welcoming them in and speaking to them kindly and helping train them? So you really have to figure out the position of of where you are in terms of that person. Kenjogo, kengo, they're all kind of words. Sonkeigo, they're words to indicate the definition, the direction. But let's not worry about any of that. The key is to speak politely. And I often tell people that when you graduate from a let's say you do 3 years in a university program and you're using desmas, which is like standard, typical, like polite way, desmas is fine. That should be appropriate as long as you're not talking to someone being like, hey, yo, what's up, Mr. Suzuki-san? Like, as long as you're not like that informal, it's totally fine to just use plain desmas and not worry about the keigo, which is honorifics, and thinking about, oh, is this person above me, below me, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about that. Once you get a little bit more used to working in an office setting or speaking with people over Teams, Zoom, whatever, and you start understanding relationships and how you can use certain phrases to make yourself more polite or bring up the other person, then you can worry about keigo, sonkeigo, kenjogo, things like that. I think sometimes we get so nervous thinking about, I don't know the difference between the three and how should I talk to this person? As long as you're polite, just being in that setting, you'll pick up on phrases and ways of learning. And let's say, and one of my tips I often say is find a buddy. Like, let's say there's an expat who came to the United States. You've been helping them out. Maybe you're sitting next to each other, and maybe you're both kind of new to the company. You get to know each other, and maybe you can help each other out with, like, you help them with some English, they help you with some Japanese. Maybe you have like one sentence a day in an email. Be like, hey, my friend, come help me. Is my Japanese correct? And they could come up to you and say, hey, is my English correct? And maybe like you're just slowly helping each other out. You can start doing like some practice. Be like, hey, in this phone call, I'm going to say something in super polite Japanese. Is this correct? And you write it down, they help you. That's how I learned. People were so kind to me over all the jobs I had. They were surprised that I wanted to learn it. They didn't expect it of me. So maybe I could have gotten away with those lower expectations, but I really wanted to learn. So find somebody who can help you. Just ask for help. You'll be surprised at how many people would actually want to help you because maybe you can help them with their English too. So it'll always be a win-win if you just find out. And lastly, I'll just mention, I also know so many people who have their Japanese job, whether they're working at a company that's related to Japan, but they don't tell anybody that they studied Japanese. They don't tell anybody that they studied abroad. Maybe the HR manager knew it on the resume, but now they're working at this company and they don't mention anything. If you say something, then more opportunities could come up because nobody's going to read your mind. They're not going to expect that you have this Japanese language or cultural component. I know of somebody who actually mentioned to their supervisor and said, hey, by the way, I kind of know Japanese and I'd love to go to Japan for a little bit. Bam, went on an expat assignment to Japan from the United States. How does that happen? And maybe I'm not sure about his Japanese before he went, but when he came back, it was pretty darn good. So having that opportunity to travel just by mentioning it out loud and not expecting people to read your mind, I think is also a great tip.
Yeah, and I think too, being able to have the experience of working in Japanese in America before even having the
Yes.
opportunity to go to Japan in order to work is so much more helpful and will make you feel more confident and more comfortable too.
Oh, yeah. And there's also a lot of companies that offer these programs. So, for example, here in Michigan, we've got Toyota and they have actual like programs. I forget the exact abbreviation. There's also another suppliers all in our area who, if you start working for them at their Michigan branch or whatever location, They have programs to send you to Japan for 1 year, 6 months, 2 years, and then you come back. So it's really good for the people who love the Japan component, but maybe don't want to live in Japan forever, or maybe living there is just not their cup of tea, but they want that exposure and they can come back, and maybe business trips, like there's so much that can be done, and there's so much help that is needed in the United States for that. And I'm still trying to, I would just like both sides to realize that we can help each other out.
I also have been kind of looking for that, that job that's able to have me interact more with Japan and send me
Yes.
back and forth and stuff. Um, Still looking for it. Happy where I am right now, but still kind of
Yep.
looking for it. But
Yep.
to know that there are those opportunities like just available as well, that is very promising.
There are, but you won't find them from a quick website
Right.
perusal. It's those you will hear about when you network. When you go to the Japan American Society events and you find out that, hey, this person who, maybe we went to the same university and now they're in Japan. What is this? Tell me more. And then you find out that they're on this program, that this company's, it's just you find it out through word of mouth, through going to these events and meeting the companies that are in the area that you want to be in. And even if let's say you want to live, you're in California and you want to live in New York City. It might be a little bit difficult to network that way, but there's still opportunities to go online and maybe get on some mailing lists, get on the New York Japan American Society list and see what companies are the sponsors, and maybe find their website, sign up for their newsletters, or go to follow their Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and kind of learn more about that. And they'll eventually share it, but it's going to be a lot of research because it's not something that's easily found. But don't let it be frustrating or overwhelming. It's out there. It just depends on how resourceful you are in trying to
Mhm.
find it out. Social media is a great way to do it. So follow those companies and see what they promote. Maybe it's a lot of like, product specific, engineering specific. You're like, I'm not interested in this, but every once in a while they'll show you, hey, we have this company event, lunch and learn. We had this Japanese language lessons at our company. Yay. Like you could still find out those little bits of company culture from social media.
And with whatever job you have too, like non-dependent on language, it is always just about the search too. Just finding what
Yes.
resonates with you and what you like, because I think a lot of people resign themselves to say like, okay, this is my passion, but I can't find any work in it, so I'm gonna have to settle for something else.
Right.
But I think they are always out there. They're just not necessarily like advertised or
Oh, yeah.
able to find on a job board. So it really is being open to things, networking, and like if you really want it, then you gotta, go through all the avenues in order to get to that point.
Absolutely. You got to kind of try things out. And I remember when I was living in Japan and I was like, oh, I'm going to have to go back home eventually, but I swear I will never work in the automotive industry. I don't care about cars, like public transportation. Then I came back and I actually started working in the automotive industry. And it was my most rewarding job ever. And I
Oh
never
wow.
would have known that if I hadn't tried. But I also didn't need to know about cars. I was helping the departments communicate with the various other companies that we had around the world, with Honsha in Japan, other Japanese language components in other countries. So I was busy with connecting people over the Japan connection and international connection. So I didn't have to worry about how an engine works or how this machine works. Like it wasn't my cup of tea. It wasn't my
Right.
specialty. So I was completely blown away that I could like a job in the automotive industry, even though I promised myself I never would do it. So you never know. You just have to sometimes try. Maybe it won't always be a hit. Maybe you'll just like realize, oh, this is not what I wanted, but at least you tried it and it's never a mistake. You now know something a little bit more about a company, a people, a way of running an industry. So yeah, I think it's what you said is perfect.
Yes, it is also always about trial and error. So,
Yeah.
but to summarize, I guess just Japanese interviews.
Yes.
So masuke is okay to use. You don't
Yes.
necessarily always need to use keigo, especially if you aren't perfectly fluent in it or familiar with it.
Right.
Are there any questions that you think would appear in a Japanese interview that probably wouldn't even be talked about in like an English interview?
I think if you're asking questions of a candidate in the United States, I believe that anybody who's going to be asking those questions is going to follow all typical like American style, what's legal, what's allowed to be asked. Japan
Right.
is a different story. Japan can ask questions that are not legally allowed in the United States.
Right.
But I
Because
do
they're also
believe,
able to ask your age in Japan, right?
yes,
Hmm.
yes. So I don't know what the laws are right now, but my understanding is that there's a lot of personal questions that could be asked, no big deal. So I think that if you do get a Japanese portion of an interview at a company in the United States, just inquiring about your Japanese, I think it's a little bit more. They'll start off with, "Tell me about how you studied Japanese and
Hmm.
where did you go in Japan? What did you like?" And you try. They just want to hear a little bit more about, your maybe your love of the culture and what you appreciated, what food, what culture, what part of the culture you liked. And then maybe they'll, if they see like, wow, this person actually does have good Japanese, then I'm assuming the next thing they may be like is, all right, well, tell me about a project you did at school or at a different company that might be applicable here. Or do you have any questions? And I always highly recommend having questions in English and in Japanese ready. So, highly recommend study the company, study their website, study their headquarters if they have a headquarters in Japan, study that Japanese website and check out their socials, kind of learn a little bit more about it. And then you'll come prepared to ask questions, be like, wow, I noticed that you only have this one office in the United States. Are you looking to expand? Or how long has this office been here in California or Texas? I'd love to learn more. Like you can ask those questions and they'll be like, oh, whoa, they're human too. They want to know that you
Yeah.
care about
Hmm.
working at a company. So to summarize, if they're going to ask you questions in Japanese, it'll start off with casual about kind of gauging what your level is so that they don't overwhelm you with some like, tell us about the derivatives of blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what that means in English, but they won't ask you crazy questions until they start off like that. And then maybe they'll ask you a question and they'll be thinking about their department and what they're looking for. And maybe a question will be based around the job description. So I don't know, take the job description, place it into DeepL or Google Translate, see what Japanese looks like, read it, and maybe try to get familiar with the words so that you won't be so taken by surprise if you do happen to have a person from that department ask you something about the responsibilities in Nihongo.
So to pivot just a little bit, and this is going to be more free talk because, and this is kind of something that we both may don't really have experience or have had in the past, and it's kind of changed. But I want to briefly discuss how to get a job in Japan as well, just because I know, with Japanese jobs, that's more what people lean towards because they're excited about the culture as well, and they're excited about either living there or relocating or learning more about Japanese and everything like that. I would say a little different from trying to find a Japanese job in America.
Oh yeah.
Um, I'll just go over because I didn't work in Japan when I was living there, but I'll go over a little bit of my experience just to kind of lay the groundwork.
Yes. Yes.
But so I studied in Tokyo for a year. I had friends that were able to kind of get like part-time jobs because it was a little difficult to find jobs while on the student visa. Um, and I felt like the for me the groundwork was laid not only by being in school there, but also just being within the culture and being able to assimilate and use Japanese pretty much daily because it was almost a necessity, that fight
Right.
or flight instinct, right? So I think that really helped my Japanese get to a higher level than I saw some other people who were either hesitant to use it outside the classroom or just not really taking classes because they had to work all the time. And maybe it was more of an English company where they didn't have the ability to pick up
Mm,
Japanese or anything like that.
right.
One of my friends actually, he was from the Philippines and got a job in Japan. And now he's pretty much able to understand Japanese, but still isn't able to speak because he's just never had to as well, which I
Mm,
think is interesting because the assimilation process and just being there um, really is almost like a teaching method as well. You really grasp a lot more of the language compared to, I remember taking a Japanese class when it was a community college class, but I think I was still in high school. I don't think I absorbed pretty much anything. Because it was an environment where you use it in class, you hear it in class, but maybe that's 30 minutes a day, maybe an hour a day, twice a week. And you're
Yeah.
never using it outside of class. You need to make that constant effort in order to memorize and the confidence to use it. And if no one around you is also taking that class, it
Oh,
doesn't give you
yeah.
a chance to be able to use it. And I was like, I'm just never gonna learn. But being in Japan really did help. But I
Yep.
did never get to that Japanese job in Japan level because I came back when the pandemic started just to be on more steady ground, I would say.
Right.
Um, but I know you have a little more experience. Would you say that feeding in from a like going to college and doing a study abroad thing and then kind of having that lead you into a Japanese job, is that easier than kind of just like going forth and trying to find one? Even if you do have a background in Japanese, let's say like your family speaks it at home
Mm.
or something like that, but you don't have that study abroad experience.
I think the when you were discussing how it just helps to be in the country, I think is so true because one of the biggest issues is a visa.
Mm.
So same with my Japanese friends who are very desperately trying to find a job here in the US. It is so hard to find a job that offers a visa.
Mhm.
I actually think that right now, maybe Japan is even a little bit easier than the US.
Oh,
So if
wow.
you wanted to work in Japan, and that's just a Kasia thing, maybe it's totally not true. I just have that impression. Working in Japan, yes, you have to, I think physically being there will help you because you're already there. And it's not like you're interviewing over Skype or Zoom or Teams just to like be like, yeah, I'll get there eventually. And, you know, if a company wants to hire you, sometimes they want you to like already be there available, right? But planning also takes time. So there's actually, I'll answer that in two ways. There's two ways you can get a job in Japan. There's the standard shushoku katsudo that everybody in Japan experiences, and that revolves around the April 1st start date of their calendar.
Mhm.
And then there's like the way that we're used to, where you apply to a company, you get a job, and there you go. So the Japan style shushoku katsudo, I actually experienced that myself, and it is so intense, but it is also quite a rush to be able to participate in that because you do use a lot of Japanese and you're applying for these companies one at a time, which sometimes can be very frustrating. So I think now there's a little bit more openness to non-native Japanese to apply because on these websites of these main companies, you will see they'll start putting the words in English so that people who don't read Japanese can also apply. So if you're interested in that kind of intense, like year-long job search, that's one way to do it. But the standard, like, hey, I'm in the United States now, I want to get a job in Japan. I think there's the study abroad way is great because while you're doing study abroad, you can network and you can do your research right there. People can meet you, they can already speak with you and be like, wow, this person's got some promise with their Japanese, or they love Japan so much they're here for study abroad. This is great. So you get to meet people and do research. The other one is the JET program. I didn't do the JET program. I did the MEXT scholarship program, which was also great, but a little bit different now than what I used to do. The JET program, it is a great way to get to Japan because it's a structured program. You know exactly when to apply. It's they also, once you are accepted, you go there and everything is kind of taken care of for you. They've been doing this for like 30 years, I believe, and they know how to welcome you and find a home for you and help you with insurance. And the schools that hire you, they know exactly what to do. So it's a great way to kind of get involved. And the JET has mainly the English teaching, but it also has the CIR role. CIR is Coordinator for International Relations, and people who are really into their Nihongo and want to improve it, that's what they should apply for because you'll be using Japanese all day, every single day. It's going to make your brain explode. But also you can apply to be like a regular English teacher. And that's another great way to go get a job overseas, whether you're already in Japan or you're outside of Japan. I think that those Eikaiwa schools, the ones that you can have English conversations, a lot of them may be very open to providing visas for people. The only thing is I would do your research about some of these companies because there's so many of them. There's also many wide-ranging reviews, so take them with a grain of salt because, as we know, anybody who does reviews is usually very disappointed, and the good people maybe aren't writing the reviews. So just be careful of that, but do some research. I think that'll be helpful. But honestly, I think being in Japan, either as a student or maybe you're finishing up the JET program, it's that in-person networking. It's the ability to be like, yes, I'm going around Tokyo. I love it here. I want to stay here forever. Let's go to Marunouchi and look at some companies and like go to this place and look at places. Like that's going to help you so much than being like, hey, I'm overseas outside of Japan. I have this dream to go to Japan. And when you get there eventually, maybe it's not what you expected. That is kind of a heartbreak too, because a lot of people who, especially if I know a lot of my friends who are into manga and anime have this vision of Japan that is like heaven to them. And I'm like, well, it's like any country, there's going to be pluses and minuses. It may or may not match what you're expecting. So maybe go there on a trip. We can go there as a tourist for 3 months. What a great opportunity to go and network and go to these random events that are happen to be involved in your industry that you would like to work in. And go there and just kind of get a feel for it before working so hard to get a visa, trying to get a job, going there. Living there can sometimes be very difficult, as I'm sure you imagine, with like, you know, getting an apartment and figuring out where to like what to eat and where to go and how to separate your garbage. Like a lot of that can be very stressful. So I think doing a little bit of research is helpful. So I know that was a very long answer, but let me know what your thoughts are.
No, I agree. And I do want to say that for first time people who are a little hesitant, like they really want to go to Japan, but they're a little hesitant, maybe they've never lived abroad before, going with a program like JET is probably the best
Yes.
thing to do. Personally, I did not go through any program. I applied directly to my language school. I had to find my apartment. I got kicked out of my apartment. I had to find another apartment. It was like a scheduling issue with the company I was
Wow.
going through, and they only scheduled me for 6 months. They kicked me out, and I had to find another place halfway through. Luckily, everything did work out, but those experiences, I had an amazing time, and I think that's why my comprehension and speaking level got so um, good in such a short amount of time because I had to register my address 4 or 5 times with the ward
Yeah.
office and trying to figure out which ward office to go to. I ended up like, no, I don't even want to go to one where they speak English. I'll just go to the ones where they speak Japanese because the lines will be shorter, right? But being able
Right.
to do all that yourself is amazing when you want to assimilate and you really want to learn the language.
Yep.
But for a first time person, like it's not that I wasn't nervous doing it. I was very nervous doing it.
Yeah.
There's just many more layers and many more obstacles that you do have to go through if you don't go through a program.
Yeah. And sometimes you just don't know where to go for help. You don't know who can help you with stuff. But there are agencies that can help you with job searching,
Right.
like Hello Work. And they do speak English and you can go there and they can help you. But sometimes it's not, you just don't know that you can go there. And also like, if you're in Japan, you have mental health issues. You also like, are you really struggling? You need to talk with somebody. Sometimes you feel alone that you don't know where to go. So doing that research in advance, being like, all right, if I have an issue with this, I can go here. Maybe you can even find somebody who specifically helps with moving. Like some recruiters will really help with completely with relocation. You just have to like look into that and see what they can do because Japanese companies want foreign talent. They need foreign talent and they're getting them from various countries and they know they need to open up the borders to have more people help them out. So we can help them out with with our own ways too. So it can be like a good relationship together. Hey, come to Japan. All right, I'm coming. What can I do? And like just kind of figure things out. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. Some of them might be not so easy to find, but definitely keep searching. And there's a bunch of recruiters and job boards, like I said, who will help foreigners in Japan.
So we are almost out of time, I think,
All
but there
right.
is one last topic that I kind of wanted to go over. And it's actually to help one of my Japanese friends. So he contacted me recently. We were kind of catching up because, time zones and everything. It's always a little hard when they're running on a different time zone, how to connect. But right now he works as a caregiver
Mm.
for a home, and he's kind of weighing his options on trying to find something new to do. Culturally, finding a job is very different than finding a job here. But I think he is a little worried about having experience or not having a college education and whatever he might want to apply to. And then I also read an article recently about how unqualified Japanese youths are trying to find jobs, and it's just very difficult for them because there's a lot of barriers to entry, right? I mean, this is kind of a cultural difference thing too. But what do you think he could be able to do in order to kind of like get into another field, as well as because I was also kind of brainstorming, you working in caregiving, and I feel like that gives you a lot of skills. Maybe you don't necessarily feel like it does, but
Yeah.
it really does open a lot of doors. So I was thinking mental health, which isn't something super big in Japan right now, but I think as time goes on, as the culture continues to shift as well, I think that could be something that might open up, as well as Red Cross, like kind of
Yeah.
disaster prevention and helping people in that kind of way. Uh, but do you have any insights on kind of what jobs and what kind of things are trending in Japan, or what's kind of easier to get into?
And just to confirm, is he currently in Japan and looking for a job within Japan?
So he is Japanese, currently in Japan, doesn't speak any English,
Okay.
which I was like, maybe you can just learn English because that'll also open a lot of
Oh,
doors.
yeah.
But I feel like also it is a stretch, especially when you are working and trying to learn a new language. And I know he has a lot of overnight shifts too,
Mm,
that's kind of why he's looking in other directions, because he is so exhausted. He doesn't want to get
mm.
too burnt out.
So I have quite a few things to say on this topic, and
Okay.
because I'm not in Japan, maybe I'm not the best person to answer, but my impression of what I hear from Japan is that Japan has been battling two social issues for a long time now, which is shoshika, the low birth rate, and koreika, which is the aging population. So more and more of these caregiving roles are so needed that I've been hearing that the Japanese government has been pulling in workers from overseas, maybe in the APAC countries, to come work in Japan to help with the koreika, the elderly population that needs this care. That was just one thought. I think that industry would become so necessary, and maybe if he's focused just on care, maybe he can help with if he has any kind of management potential or leadership skills, maybe he'd be interested in helping run these care facilities or maybe expanding care facilities. I really feel like that's going to become so important. The second thing I thought of is if he's interested in sticking with the care topic. So I know this company that I may have mentioned, I talk about it in my newsletters, but shout out to Health Day in Japan. They are focused on empowering the elderly in Japan, and they have this platform to speak English with people who are studying Japanese. So this company is helping connect language learners, Japanese language learners outside of Japan, to get on this app called Sail to speak with their elderly people who just want to connect virtually with somebody because maybe they aren't able to. This company received donations from like electronics companies. They've donated tablets to these care facilities so that these elderly people can connect and get this, like, in a sense, an Ikigai to connect with people around the world. So that kind of humanitarian helping type of stuff just makes my heart feel all nice and warm inside. So I think there's a lot that can be done to help the elderly, whether you speak English or not. But if you did speak a little bit of English, that might be interesting to maybe manage workers from coming from overseas in that area. Now, if let's say it's too exhausting and maybe he'd like to consider something else to do, I think in Japan, going to like a program certification, same in the United States. If you want to learn a new skill, take some evening courses. If you can, go online. There's so many things being offered online right now. I'm sure Japan is the same, where you can get a certificate in whatever field, or whether it's computers or nothing related to, I don't know. There's lots of things out there that maybe you can do some quick searching. And Japan's bookstores are famous for all these like Numon, entry to whatever field you want to get into. You can learn the 101 about any topic on the planet just by going to a bookstore and figuring, like, getting these Numon books. Numon means entrance to the like gate, the entranceway, so 101 courses. And maybe there's something out there that would pique his interest and he could look into other fields. But reading about it, discovering something else, maybe getting a certificate in that, I think is going to be very helpful if he wants to get out of the care field as well too. So those are my two thoughts that I had as you were talking.
No, perfect. I will be sure to pass those on. And yeah, I do think like the elderly care kind of field is something that it's only going to keep growing.
Yeah.
So it is something to look into as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up here. I
Okay.
want to say thank you so much, Kasha, for your time, for your insights, for your expertise,
こちらこそありがとうございます。Thank you so much.
and of course, I want to give you some time to shout out all your social medias, your website, where people can find you, and where people can find Nihongo jobs.
Yes. Thank you. So I basically run a website called Ikigai Connections. That's my main company name. And it's where you've got the blog. I've got lots of resources. So if you want to go to Japan, there's a Japan resource page. I've got America resource page, Poland, Canada, all these different kind of countries where if you want to work in a Japanese job, you can go there. And I also have just lots of senpai success stories. If you want to learn how somebody else did something, that's where the blog is. Nihongojobs.com is the job board. So if you're interested in any kind of Japanese related jobs in the United States, you can go to Nihongo Jobs and you just put in whatever you're looking for and see what comes up. So on average, I have about 3,300 job ads every day. They get updated daily. So I don't know every job ad that's on there, but there's a lot for people to find depending on the location. And all my social medias you can find on either of those websites at the very bottom. I'm mostly on LinkedIn, as you mentioned. I know I need to get a little bit more active on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I have a TikTok account, just haven't been using it. But so far, it's just been me. And I'm definitely working on like getting my message out more because as you can tell, I feel very passionate about connecting these two groups, these two great groups of globally minded companies and people like you and I who just are kind of into Nihongo. We like the Japanese culture. We want to connect with native Japanese people. And a lot of my friends, like who are Nisei Sansei, who are of Japanese descent, also kind of, they want to get back into their Japanese heritage and kind of learn more about it. So if I can just help people, that's kind of my little ikigai to save that part of such a niche world, but I think there's a lot of potential there. So thank you for your time. And I'm so excited to see this come out.
Yeah, I am very excited to get into working on editing this. Yes, everyone make sure to follow Kasia on LinkedIn. She's the most active there. And let's start following her on TikTok as well to get the ball rolling, you know? that might be the catalyst in order for her to start posting on there. You never know. So
you never know. Absolutely.
But once again, thank you. And this was great. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.